We are creating a fabulous ecosystem where eventually in 4 or 5 years we become like a superpower.
Yeah, and I think that's reflecting the quality of their customers. I think ISRO, DRDO, HAL, Bharat Dynamics.
The markets receive them with full glory.
But one of the more exciting segments in the future is drone technology.
They're the foot soldiers of the future.
Exactly. And clearly, data patterns and Paris have done a really commendable job at making that happen. So, welcome back to the 14th episode of the Indian Market Story. This is the second part of our ongoing series on the defense sector in India. And today we're going to be talking about a really interesting niche within the defense space, which is private sector defense players. Do you want to give our viewers an introduction into that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely, Varun. I think always looking forward to these podcasts, and this is a very interesting topic, the defense sector, which is in the limelight at this point of time because of all the reasons we discussed in the previous
Absolutely.
podcast, where we talked about the large PSU defense companies, but we spoke about HAL, Bharat Electronics, and Bharat Dynamics, and how successfully they are developing new technologies and new products for very advanced warfare. But for India's defense sector to grow and to really thrive and prosper, and even for these three companies to grow in size and to be technologically self-sufficient, they need a ready and steady base of suppliers.
Right.
And that's where these two listings, these two private sector companies, defense companies, got listed in 2021. First being Paras Defense in October 21, and then Data Patterns in December 21. I think for the first time we had a genuine private sector defense supplier being listed on our exchanges, and why the markets received them with full glory, and they had fantastic listing. But to come back to the private sector's role in defense,
So just before we get to the private sector's role in defense, just to give our viewers some context, private sector companies are only 22% of the overall defense market cap. So the defense market cap of all defense stocks is about $40 billion or 3 lakh crores, and private defense companies are only a fraction of that at 22%. And some really interesting things that I wanted to note in this space is, I guess, maybe the reason that we only recently have privately listed defense players is that only a couple of years ago the government allowed 100%
Exactly.
private ownership of defense producers and 74% FDI in defense players, which makes it a lot easier for private sector players to come up in the defense space.
that's right, but that we're talking about the unlisted space, because it's basically this policy is to attract a whole host of defense companies who set up a manufacturing base in India, given that there's a captive market. But the two listings which have really taken to the fancy of the investors, they are pure homegrown defense supply companies.
Right.
And they have invested a lot in technology, and a great deal of effort goes into being qualified to supply systems, subsystems, products, services, and technology to the likes of the Bharat Electronics or HAL or any of the other defense production companies, or
Right.
even some of the defense research laboratories within India. So I think they've done a commendable job. It's not an easy business. You may say that there's no competition, but just to get qualified, to win the order, to establish that kind of a trust and maintain those confidentiality systems in place is quite a challenge.
And not to mention, I think one of the most pertinent challenges as a private defense player is the need to innovate, because you're not competing with other rational players that are investing for a financial outcome. You're competing with other governments where they're investing purely with the aim of producing that technology. And clearly, data patterns and Paris have done a really commendable job at making that happen.
Absolutely, and I think they have received a fair degree of encouragement from the defense sector as well, because it is this government's policy to give a lot of encouragement to such entrepreneurs who can invest in technology, who can invest in manufacturing, who can keep up with the technology requirements and the component and the subsystem requirements of the large defense companies. So, there's a whole technology program which is taking place within the defense sector. It is well coordinated by the defense ministry, and other ministries also have a key role to play. And in a way, we are creating a fabulous ecosystem where eventually in 4 or 5 years we become like a superpower when it comes to making manufacturing defense equipment, and right from complete backward integration
Right.
and an entire component supply system as well.
Right. I mean, I'm not. I think let's maybe rein in our enthusiasm of becoming a defense superpower in such a short time frame. But nonetheless, let's talk about the two companies that we have, Data Patterns and Paras. So let's maybe start with Data Patterns and give our viewers a sense of why this is so much of a market darling. So I think previously we've discussed the three key figures being order book, revenue, and profit, and what they mean.
Yes, comes the most exciting part for these
Yeah.
companies. Their performance and track record is not as, I would say, tepid as the PSU defense companies. So
Right.
that's it.
So I think Data Patterns order book has grown at 38% compounded over the last 5 years.
Wow.
Yeah, their revenues have grown at 28% compounded over the last 5 years. And here's wait for the absolute blowout number of words.
Profit after tax.
Yes, the PAT has grown at 74% compounded over the last 5 years.
Wow.
And I mean, just before, investors turn around and push their money into the stock, let's just take a second to also realize that they're extremely richly valued. 84 PE, which is sky high levels by any account.
Yeah, but I'm not surprised with that. If you have growth of kind of 74% compound, and the street is expecting 40-50% compound growth for the next 3 years or so, and if the stock price stays at these levels, you will see this price to earnings multiple dwindle in the next 2-3 years or so.
Right.
And even 3-4 years from now, I think a company like Data Pattern has a great future.
Right.
Because they'll keep on investing in technologies. Their customers will require more and more high tech, uh, high high cost equipment, which will means that their margins are maintained, and there's a huge market for them to export as well as supply to the domestic market. So I'm not surprised with investors' enthusiasm for Data Patterns. And typically, Varun, in this market, I've seen that when there are very such niche investment themes and only two or three companies which you can invest in for those niche investment themes, those stocks always get marked up on a price to earnings multiple, and which is why Data Patterns is trading at this 80 times plus. And mind you, I think a lot of the growth has come post listing. As I remember, it got listed at 864, and it's more than doubled to about 1800 rupees at this point of time in about I would say 1.5 years or so. So great listing and a great listing track record for Data Patterns.
So let's give the viewers a sense of exactly what Data Patterns is, what they do, and how they add value to the defense ecosystem. So Data Patterns primarily provides electronics communications equipment and radar systems. And I think when we look at how warfare plays out today, where most of the action is beyond visual range, these radar systems need to be extremely sophisticated, and they're one of the most important components of any military, particularly because they need to be extremely tightly coupled across multiple devices, and that data needs to be very carefully integrated, which is where I guess the Data Patterns name come from.
Exactly. So you can imagine how difficult these things are to manufacture, and technology keeps on changing, and you need constant upgradation as well. So I think a company like Data Patterns has a great future, and it's one of these businesses where you will see great earnings potential over the next several years or so. Markets have recognized it, which is why they are trading at these P multiples. But I think that on a correction, if you look at Data Patterns on a longer term horizon, I think it has a great future, particularly because of its scale, because of its presence, and again, it gets built that moat around it, because
Right.
of its products. It's not very easy for people to start offering products and services what Data Pattern offers.
Yeah, and I think that's reflecting the quality of their customers. I think ISRO, DRDO, HAL, Bharat Dynamics, it's I guess a blue chip customers to have really in the space.
Absolutely. And mind you, none of the India's business groups have been able to crack this business. So there may be something in the promoters and entrepreneurs of Data Patterns. They are technocrats. They have a deep understanding of the technologies and of the requirements of the Indian defense industry, which is why they are so successful.
Right. So let's move on from Data Patterns to the other darling of the space, Paras Defense and Space Technologies. So I guess let's maybe talk about what makes Paras Defense and Space such a really unique play.
Yeah, that's why I think because the name also is not just defense, it's space as well. And India has been making great strides when it comes to all of its space endeavors as well. We've been manufacturing satellites and rockets, and we've been trying to increase our spending on space technologies, and that's where a company like Paras Defense also comes into play. Again, all of these businesses are very technology intensive. It requires many, many years of being pre-qualified. Then you have to maintain a high degree of systems quality control to ensure that the order flow and the supply is as per the expectations of the customer. A lot of testing also goes into the products and systems which these companies supply. And from that point of view, I think Paras Defense has been a huge, huge success. Why don't you roll out the numbers? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I think in comparison, the data patterns, Paras may not look as fantastic, but still a really, really quality set of numbers. So their order book has grown at 46% compounded over the last 5 years, which is very healthy by any standards. Although revenue's only grown about 6.7%, profit has done very well at 13.6%. So maybe not data patterns, but I guess they're growing off a much larger base.
that's right, I think, and these businesses are very difficult to understand what their growth rates can be. As we've been talking in this podcast, it's very technology intensive, and therefore, for us to understand and project where these companies could be 3, 4 years from now is very difficult. All we can say is that the underlying momentum on defense spending, on indigenization programs is very strong, and that's where companies like Data Patterns and Paras Defense come into play. But mind you, Paras Defense trades at a reasonable,
Yeah,
comparatively
comparatively
reasonable
reasonable PE.
price to earning multiple of 63, 64 times or so. And again, I think if they grow their profits by 30, 40%, which is what is expected over the next 3 to 4 years or so, this kind of a price to earnings multiple may seem to be justified.
Absolutely.
But the key thing again in both Paras Defense and Data Patterns is that we should expect volatility in their earnings quarter on quarter. Because sometimes the order flows and ebbs. So they have good quarters when a lot of deliveries take place, a lot of subsystems are ready and are being accepted by their customers, and there could be lean periods as well.
Yeah, and I think Paris is got a relatively unique set of subsystems, and which is why they're able to offer it to both the aerospace industry as well as the space industry. Maybe let's take a second to explain to our viewers what it is that they provide. So Paris Aerospace primarily works in the optical systems and EMP systems space. So I think we talked about data patterns as being beyond visual range and enabling warfare beyond visual range. Paras primarily works in extending visual range, so hyperspectral imaging equipment, underwater imaging equipment, long distance imaging equipment, things that go up in satellites. And I guess that's their unique competence. But I think they have a very unique way of approaching what it is that they do.
Yeah, that's right. I think the way you spoke about these products, I can just imagine how difficult they are to manufacture,
Right.
maintain. I mean, and that clearly is the moat for these companies that it's not easy to replicate what they are doing.
Yeah. So Paris actually has a very unique strategy where they don't. I think data patterns maybe what they do is they develop these products in house. They make them perfect and then they deliver them to their customers. Paris works with entrepreneurs, and Paris aims to build new business lines through subsidiary companies.
Like
So
drones.
yeah, exactly. So we spoke about their optical imaging systems, but one of their more exciting segments in the future is drone technology, and I think we'll get into how exactly they're building up their drone capabilities. But I guess to explain why drones are so important, we spoke about how the skies over Ukraine are clear in the last podcast and why that means a mixed future for the aerospace industry. But that's not entirely accurate. The sky is full of drones. All the way down to a unit level, drones are being used for targeting missiles. They're being used as complementary pieces of equipment to, a set of soldiers, a squadron of
So they're
soldiers.
the foot soldiers of the future.
Exactly. So drones are part of the foot soldiers of the future, and to see an indigenous drone manufacturer, and IdeaForge is another one, but maybe one for another day. But to see a defense-focused drone manufacturer coming to the table is quite positive news for India's defense.
Absolutely, and I think as and when this subsidiary of theirs gathers scale, it'll create a lot of value for shareholders of Paras Defense as well. So I think these are all exciting businesses to be in, and these are businesses of the future. And there will be a great deal of earning visibility, which is also reflected in the stock price. But I think at least investors have a choice between going for the large uh, PSU defense companies and you have these nimble-footed private
Private sector
sector
defense
defense.
players. Yeah.
And mind you, there's a great deal of more aggression in the private sector defense companies. And I
Mm-hmm.
think they are very well placed to exploit the export market even better than the PSU defense
Right.
companies. You should keep that in mind.
Absolutely, and I think I'm really gonna tease this out for our users, where we're going to be talking about the numbers of the export market in the next podcast. But I wanted to just take a quick second to talk about the future of private sector defense players. Right now, we only have two. Are there any more defense IPOs on the horizon? Do we expect to see more defense players coming into the market?
Well, I should hope so. In due course, we'll have many more such Paras defense and data patterns as well. But more importantly, Varun, what is happening is that there are two or three companies which are into traditional businesses in India, but they're getting very heavily invested in defense.
Mm-hmm.
Two companies come to mind. One is Larsen and Toubro, and the other is Bharat Forge.
Mm-hmm.
They have a dedicated division for defense,
Mm-hmm.
and they're looking at getting into full-fledged manufacturing of defense equipment
Mm-hmm.
through homegrown technologies or partnerships. And they feel that defense is a high growth area for them.
Right.
Like Bharat Forge already manufacturing certain, I would say, those large guns and
Mm-hmm.
some of the other critical defense equipment. So eventually, although they are not complete defense companies, but they will have very profitable and highly value added defense divisions.
Right.
And then there is Solar Industries, which is also a manufacturer of explosives. Right now, I think their defense exposure is in the mid-teens or so, but that's growing much faster than the rest of the businesses. So they're getting more and more into into artillery, into explosives, into sophisticated devices
Mm-hmm.
and bombs for the defense sector.
Right.
And those are all highly high value added, and again very difficult to manufacture and be pre-qualified for. So
Right.
while we may have only maybe a handful of 100% defense companies, but defense spending is on the rise in India globally as well.
Mm-hmm.
And some companies will have these defense divisions which will do very well for them. Tata's also have a
Mm-hmm.
few of these
Yeah.
businesses coming into play.
All right. Well, I think that's a really interesting set of facts and a really interesting way to think about how to play the defense space for our users. And I think we'll see them back for the third segment, which is the naval PSU space, which is, I think, one of the most exciting spaces for me personally. And hopefully we'll also talk about India's potential as an export powerhouse in global arms trade.
Absolutely. Look forward to that podcast.
This podcast is produced by Elixir Equities Private Limited, a SEBI registered research analyst. Registration number INA 0000004787. The information provided in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only and should not be considered as investment advice. Investment in securities market are subject to market risk. We strongly advise all investors to read all related documents carefully before investing.